Okay, so not only are we going to review the greatest infection sequel ever made, but we're also going to review the greatest infection movie ever made. Let's do 28 Weeks Later, the one and only. 28 Weeks Later stars Robert Carlyle, Jeremy Renner, Rose Byrne, and is directed by Juan Carlos Fresnadillo.
We've lost control. Kill everyone.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the 28 series reviews. I just, out of spur of the moment, I wasn't even going to review 28 days and 28 weeks, but I asked you guys, and you overwhelmingly told me you would love for me to review 28 days and weeks, and you were even happy for me to do it after years. But I thought, you know what? I love my subscribers and my viewers so much that I'm going to try to get both these done before the movie, and that's what we're going to do. 28 Years Later comes out on Thursday. As of right now, it's Tuesday night, so this should be up Wednesday. So we're going to time this just right, and I think I'm a little bit more excited for this one. I love Days. I think it's a very important film, but Weeks has my heart. Oh my God. I love this movie to death, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you my story with this movie. This movie means a lot to me. I think it's amazing. And I've been chomping at the bit. I tried not to gush too much in the Days review about how I really felt about Weeks, but now it's my time to let my rage freak flag fly. If you look behind me, you'll see 28 Days and Weeks Later on Blu-ray. Those are worth a pretty penny. I think, were they both announced for 4K? I'm not sure, even though I don't know why you would want a 4K of 28 Days Later. If you know, you know. But yeah, I bought those pretty much when they first came out. I think when Weeks came out, I went ahead and bought both of them. I've had those on Blu-ray for quite a few years, maybe even over a decade. And I got them for a really good price. So be jealous if you don't have those. And for a while, you couldn't even find either movie on streaming. I think before they really got ramped up with Years. But let's dive into this review. Let's give you a quick plot synopsis. This movie came out in 2007, which is 18 years ago now, which is insanity to me. I can't believe it's been 18 years, and now we know why they decided to go ahead and leapfrog months and call this Years Later. There are really no connections outside of the Rage Infected from the first movie to Weeks. They do occupy the same world, of course, but in this movie, they have pretty much gotten the virus contained. There is this green zone in the UK, but the movie opens with, I think, one of the best freaking intro scenes out of any horror movie I've ever seen. It is so freaking intense. You got this small group of families together in this like cabin out in the woods, the wilderness. And they're just living their life. They've managed to escape the infected and, staying hidden. And then, of course, the infected find them. And it's just mass chaos. And our main character of the movie, although it is kind of hard to hone in on who exactly is the main character, because the first, third of the movie, or even maybe half of the movie, you would think it's Don. This movie opens up with Don, who is a good husband, loving husband, loves his wife. We don't see the kids yet. But again, they're in that really chaotic situation, and the infected get between him, Don, and his wife, Alice, played by Catherine McCormick. You might know her from Braveheart. Even though she's not in this movie that much, she is a major part of the movie, and she's almost kind of like the heartbeat of the movie, because we see her image kind of flash at certain moments throughout the movie. Don is having these images of her in the movie, and the reason being is because, again, they were separated. They had the infected between them. It was mass chaos, and then Don ends up leaving her and the rest of the group there, and he's running away, and immediately you can feel the guilt that this guy is dealing with. It's one of those situations where you don't have a second to react. And what I love about this movie is that there is a portion of the audience that really, really feels for Don. And then there's a portion of the audience that almost hates Don because of the decision that he has made. And I think that makes for a wonderful character. And you have to give Robert Carlyle massive credit for his acting chops on this role, because it takes some heavy lifting in the acting department, and he does a phenomenal job. And for those that hate him, they forget how great of a performance he's actually giving in this role. Writing that line, he's not playing a straight up like bad guy, a douchebag. He's playing a human being. And human beings, they make mistakes. I think when you are in a situation like this, or better yet, when you're standing outside of a situation like this, or even watching a movie like this, we often say what we would do in that situation. We know in our bones what we would do in that situation until you are met with that situation. And I tell myself when I'm watching this movie, no way in hell would I ever leave my family in that situation. And I think 99.9% chance I wouldn't. But there's also that 0.1% chance where maybe you're kind of forced to. Who knows? But I like how this character really creates a conversation, and he is probably the anchor of the entire movie, even after he is infected. So he has left his wife. In his mind, she is probably dead. Gets on the mainland. He is rescued. And then there is a military operation. They have a green zone, and they have managed to keep, the infected out. This is a fine-tuned military operation. I was in the military when this movie came out, so oftentimes when you're in the military and you're watching movies with a military presence, you tend to kind of focus heavily on what they're doing, how they're handling the operation. And I think if you're in the military, you might poke holes a little bit, but this very much reminded me of some of the exercises that we went through when I was in the military. We would hold scenarios like this where you'd have a command post, and what would you do if you were in, in a virus type situation. As far as military movies go, I tend to like the ones that sort of take a back seat to the main plot, but they're still extremely important, like, say, Aliens, or like this. Those are the movies that really tickle my fancy in terms of military. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I do like straight up military movies, and I think there are some really great ones. But more times than not, I like this type of stuff. Maybe that's the horror fan in me, I don't know. But Don's children are Tammy and Andy, and he tells them that he watched the wife die, and then that's a big mistake on his part, because of course that comes into play later. Tammy and Andy, they venture outside of the actual green zone, which is a no-no, and they end up stumbling upon their mother, Alice. And this is where the story really takes a turn. This is okay, now the plot thickens. She is alive. And I remember seeing this in the theater when it came out, and not knowing where the story was going to go. And then as soon as you see that she's alive, and you can tell that she is infected, even though she's not raging out, that's where the story really got interesting for me. Because she is eventually reunited with Don, and this particular moment, that feeling of guilt that he has been consumed with ever since she left, and she tells him simply that she loves him, and it's almost like she's saying, forgive yourself, it's okay. And he doesn't realize that she's infected. And so this particular scene, let me back up here for a second, okay? I get carried away when I talk about this movie. This particular scene especially. I've talked about scary movies in the past, especially lately, talking about how people judge movies on if they are scary or not. And my argument to that is I don't think being scary is necessarily the most important thing about a movie being good or not. But this just happens to be one of those situations where this movie's, in my mind, phenomenal, but it's also scary. And I think what makes it scary is the emotional punch. Can you imagine a husband and a wife meeting together? They clearly love each other to death. Husband doesn't know that she's infected. He kisses her, and then immediately he becomes infected and he kills her. Me saying that is different than watching the whole thing unfold. It's a beautifully directed scene. You feel almost really bad for Don because of all the guilt that he feels, but then immediately he turns into this rage monster. And that scene, it's terrifying. It really is terrifying. And I think the scenes that get me the most in terms of being scared, and me as a dyed-in-the-wool horror fan, I can probably count on one hand how many times I've been genuinely frightened or scared of a movie. And usually there's an emotional reason for that. You know, thinking back to like Halloween 4, the idea of a little child who you are behind the whole time and you want her to survive so bad, and then she becomes evil. That's what got me. That's what was scary to me. If it was just, you know, a superficial child being evil, that doesn't really get me there. But having that emotional connection, that's what does it. And that's what did it in this scene. So throughout the rest of the movie, Don is a major factor, and this is something that we didn't see in the 28 Days Later. The infected were just that. There was no really emotional anchor to them, except for maybe Frank. But as soon as Frank turned infected, that was it. He was no longer Frank. Don, yeah, he's definitely fully raged out, but it seems like there's like maybe 2% of him in there that can't let go of his children, that's constantly chasing after his children. Bringing it back to Halloween, you can look at Michael Myers. Maybe there's 2% of him that maybe you can reach, and only Loomis can reach that. So I couldn't help but compare this to that in terms of a monster. That's really what Don is at this point. But that monster, he still has that connection, and that's because of the guilt. You know, I think this movie is a huge metaphor for guilt. And I think we all have guilt at one point in our lives. And I think that's why this movie does touch a lot of people. I do think it's underrated, though. I don't think people talk about Weeks enough. I think there's so much in this movie. And I think because of the novelty of the first movie and that it was shot with DV cameras, we can often overlook certain aspects of this movie because it's shot in traditional, like I think 35 millimeters what it was shot in, beautifully looking film, but it's still beautifully directed. But I think there's more of a focus on characters and themes of guilt, even heroics, which is a good transition into the character Doyle. Doyle is pretty much the antithesis of Don, even though they're both not like bad people, like bad guys or anything like that. I'm just talking about in terms of heroism and strength. Doyle, played by Jeremy Renner, which, by the way, I think if I had to really pick apart this movie, and it's definitely something that I would want, them killing off Jeremy Renner, I think was a major mistake because he was fabulous in this movie. You loved Doyle as a character. You wanted him to succeed. He was the Hicks of the movie, like Michael Biehn and Aliens. That's what Jeremy Renner was in this. You know, you loved him. He was a good guy, but he was also willing to give his life to save those children. And Scarlett, played by Rose Byrne, who was a medical officer. And Doyle's just, he's a grunt. He's enlisted. Closing this review off, there is so much to this movie that I love. There's so much in the way of action. There are some decisions in the script that are quite surprising, like Doyle, who is a really good guy, following orders and actually shooting innocent people running on the ground. This script definitely takes chances and offers situations that might not be approved of by everybody. Being retired military, I completely understand, the situation that they're in and having to make decisions for the greater good. But yeah, I'm going to give this movie a Trapped on an Island, and that's a selfish thing for me because I love this movie so much. I can't deny, when you watch it now, some of the CGI is definitely dated, like the helicopter sequence where it's really cool scene where it's cutting off, and really just obliterating the rage infected. But when you watch it now, you can definitely tell, it's a CGI storm for sure. Despite all that, it doesn't take me out of the movie just because I'm so anchored in on the characters and what's going on and the heartbreak that this movie is. So I'm really glad I watched it though, because now I'm hoping certain things from this movie carry over into Years. We shall see. So let me know your thoughts on 28 Weeks Later in the comments. So looking forward to hearing them. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays. We do Fever Fridays. Follow me Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Become a channel member. Buy me coffee. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day and Drumdum out.